passive house, what does it do to our health? Well, the fact is that many houses these days don't actually add to the benefits of our health. Traditional was termed as traditional building, brick and block and insulation in between, is a very unhealthy way of construction. In fact, we take an average house, put 20,000 litres of water into constructing this build. Where does it go? The answer is nowhere. It sits there for year after year and creates mildews and molds and stuff, which is actually detrimental to our health. So what can we do about it? We can take the 5 principles of passive house and realize that this is actually improving our mental health as well as our physical health. Our mental health, because we have lots of light and we have that light, bright environment, which actually adds to how you perceive your environment and makes you happier to have daylight and makes you happier to be able to be in a consistent temperature and know what your environment's going to do for you. That's a big thing to your health as well as mental health. And physical health, when you've got purified air, filtered air coming into your building, it's not got that pollen and impurities and stuff which is from the outside. And also what you do produce inside, dust, humidity as in condensation when you're boiling a kettle, cook it, whatever. They're all taken out of the building. So therefore, fresh air coming in, all the stuff that we produce is going out. So therefore, we're not breathing it in, it's not settling into us as people. So the environment in the passive house is really healthy, mentally and physically. And I have actually seen improvement on people that live within these environments in the passive house, those who have cystic fibrosis and asthma. Now, asthma and lung conditions in young people and children has gone up by about 37% in recent years because of how we build today. And passive house will actually help to compensate and deal with these issues. Also, what do we need to look at? What else benefits can we get from passive house? Energy. You use very little energy to run this house, this build. Very little energy is going into it. Therefore, we're having less of an impact on our environment. We're not burning gases. We're not using stuff which create carbons, because most of what we do in existing buildings and the way we've been living, we produce huge amounts of carbon. The construction industry alone, just in building, can create up to about 40% of our carbon emissions in this country. Yeah, we need to reduce that. And then we live in a house and we produce more carbons. We all know that the environment we're living in on this amazing little planet is changing. Climate change is here. We know it. We see it every day now, and how it's changing the environment which we live in externally. And we can help to improve that simply by making less carbons and less sulfur, because that is what contributes to acid rain. It's also something that we produce in our way of living these days. So energy efficiency also leads to ecological change to some small point. It may be almost negligible to your one build, but if that one build becomes 10, then that 10 becomes 100. Every time we do that, this so-called insignificant amount increases, and all of a sudden it becomes significant, a major amount of change that we can do simply by the way we build. Zero carbon production. We use timber, carbon capture. Timber is wood that we use today is a good way of capturing carbons. And once we cut that down and we use it and we plant a new tree, we're actually helping carbon capture, because trees absorb carbons as they grow, about 30% more as they grow than they do when they're fully grown. and they use that for the process of photosynthesis. We all know about that. We learn about it at school, where it absorbs carbons and it uses sugars and stuff within the leaves to convert that into oxygen when it releases, and it stores the carbon. And timber is made of carbon. That's how we store it. We grow trees and we plant new ones all the time. All this helps the environment. We can improve the environment by carbon capture and zero carbon construction. We can improve health by following the passive standards. We can improve mental health by having a good, constant environment where we can have lots of light and a good way of living, and a quiet and controlled environment, which is really good for mental health. And that does lead us on to how do we live within this house? The fact there's many myths surrounding passive house. What you can't do in a passive house, you can't do this. Fact is, you can live in it how you like. There's no difference. If you have a beautiful sunny day and you want to open doors and windows, do. Live in it as you would normally if that's how you want to live in it. The only difference is when it gets cold, close everything up and allow the house to do what it's designed to do. And that's provide you with a really good, healthy environment.
John, you mentioned how health is affected by people living in traditionally constructed homes. How have you seen people's health change because they're living in a passive house?
I've actually seen the difference it makes in people's health living in a passive house, even with retrofit. In recent years, I've done a couple of retrofits around the UK, and I've seen the benefits of health, most of which have been for local authorities, council houses, which have been in really poor condition, and the people living in them, many of them were actually disabled or have mental issues, as well as physical health issues. I had one lady who was whose daughter was severely asthmatic. When she's in the building for any amount of time, she doesn't use her inhaler. She was 12 at the time. She really suffered nicely, but she loves being at home. She now knows that when she goes out, she's got to take her inhaler and everything that goes with it. When she's at home, she's much more comfortable. Hay fever sufferers, they have very little problems in the house because of the filter system. People have mental health issues. They have a light, bright, controlled, quiet environment to live in. I haven't seen anything negative to do with health, to do with a passive house. The reason I think passive house is the way to go for health-wise is because in standard construction, I've seen what can happen to a construction. When you've got a brick block and a bit of insulation in between, there's no air gap. 20,000 litres of water is sitting, can't breathe out. So it's breathing in and it's sitting there and it forms dew points. And you get a black mildew throughout the whole of the cavity. And once it's there. It's creating spores and stuff, and it's really not good for people's health, especially younger people or older people, because we're all getting older as humans. We are living longer because we are living better, but our health can be affected as we get older by the environment we live in.
So, John, you mentioned that spores are in the cavity in traditional housing. So when do those spores become airborne?
Spores of mildew and molds, especially with the mildew, the black mildew, we're all familiar with it. We have it in our bathrooms, unless you live in a passive house. What happens is if you got it in the voids and dew points within your building, as that spreads, it produces spores, especially when it starts to dry out, because it will dry out, get wet, dry out, get wet. And every time it starts to dry, it wants to spread, so therefore it produces spores. That gets in the air, gets in your lungs. It's difficult. They're so fine, it's very difficult for your lungs to get rid of this type of stuff, which is really not very good for your breathing.
You mentioned a dew point. What actually is a dew point?
What is a dew point? A dew point is where you get a collection or a build-up of moisture, basically like a condensation. If you've got an airtight barrier and you've got an insulation and you've got a cold building, cold brick, stone, whatever, you've got a variance of temperatures. There's air there. Those variances of temperatures will create a moisture line or potential moisture line, which is known as the dew point, because this is where the dew or the moisture builds up at the contact.
John, I know that in the past you've talked to me about how health can be improved, and you've talked about cystic fibrosis and how people with that condition can be helped. Do you want to just touch on that in terms of your own personal case?
Yes, I have family who have lung condition. It's called cystic fibrosis. It's particularly nasty, especially for younger people. Their lifespan is shortened by this condition. I have actually seen how their life can be improved a little bit by the environment they live in, because they're living in clean, filtered air, and they live in the constant temperature and a consistent environment around them. And their bodies get used to it, and they actually can be more lively. As I say, that how lively they become and how they can react within the build, and how less restrictive this horrible condition is, purely because of a few changes and use some of the principles of passive house. This was something that was done to an existing mid-Victorian building. Just took some of the things to which we've learned over the years and put into this, and we've improved their environment. We haven't gone to passive standards, but we've used the principles to create a better atmosphere for them, and it has worked.
John, just thinking about your personal experiences, and I recall a time where you actually experienced putting your hand inside a cavity. Do you want to just touch on that?
Yes, I have had personal experience of the mildew that we've been speaking about. A number of years ago, I did a very nice little bungalow for a lovely guy, quadriplegic guy, purposely designed house, lovely place. And a phone call one day asking whether we can move, because in those days we used gas boilers, whether we can move the flue to another wall, because he wanted to redesign this about 18 months after he'd moved in. So I said, well, I'll come down Saturday, I'll bring my core bit, put a hole through the wall, and then you can deal with it from there. I went down, I drilled through from the inside first, put my pilot hole through, my guide hole, then took out the core for the block work. It was traditional brick insulation, block work, render and plaster on the inside. As I took it out, didn't really notice much, put it down the side. Went to pull the insulation out from inside hole, my hand was wet. And there was black bits on my fingertips, and I thought, say 18 months down the line, I was expecting some form of that, but not that degree of it. So I pulled it out, and then put my hand on the inside, and that come out, I'd had mildew all over my hands. This is my first insight to how buildings can affect our environment. So that's when I started looking into how can this affect what it is we do and how we live. And it wasn't down to that one building. It wasn't just down to that one premises that we'd constructed for this guy. It was the realization that every house that had been built to the regulations of that type was going to be exactly the same. And we're not talking a few hundred houses, we're talking tens of thousands over the country, because that is built to regulation. But the regulations were wrong.
So you've realised that the quality of housing can improve, and we're big advocates of building to passive house standards. But how easy is it to build to a passive standard?
how easy is it to build to a passive standard? Well, if you use just some of the basic principles, you're going to improve the way you build. Even if you're not going to achieve passive standards with your construction, maybe just implementing some of those basics and thinking about it in the design of how you put it together. And you're going to improve on what you do. You're going to use less energy. You're going to have a healthier, a better environment, and you're going to have less impact on the environment. And therefore, you're not going to contribute to damage and impact that we have on this planet any more than you have to. So just applying the principles will help in some way.
Yeah, so I know that fuel poverty is something that's quite close to you. But putting fuel poverty to one side, how does building traditionally affect and damage the environment? Just sort of walk us through that a little bit.
How does how we build traditionally affect our environment? Well, we've already said about 40% of the carbons we produce in this country are to do with construction. It's to do with the materials we use, how they're produced. It's to do with how we transport those. Because every time we have bricks and blocks and insulation or whatever else turns up on site, there's a carbon count for that process or that individual movement of materials. So we need to look at how we can improve that timber construction, better thought processes of insulation and how we deliver it, cutting down time on roads and transport issues. This is all a way that we can help. So the construction industry at the moment is changing, needs to change more, but it is changing on how we construct and how we think about it, because we need to bring this carbon count down.
Yeah, I've heard one of the sayings is we're paying to heat the streets, but ultimately, while we're paying to heat the streets, we're actually damaging the environment through fossil fuels, and that's the thing that I know that you struggle to understand why, as an industry, we're not actually building to a higher standard when it's so easy to do.
That's correct. The thing is, why are we building to the standards that we're building? We don't need to. Fuel poverty, everything that we do is affected by the amount of energy we use. We do not need to have all our energy escape into the streets. You might as well, in many constructions, just open the window every now and again, throw a fibre in the street. That's what you do. Okay, we need to contain that energy, use less of it, and save money and stop people from being put into fuel poverty, because there are many tens of thousands of people affected by this, and it's all because of the way we build. Let's put the 5 principles into action, and therefore we're not going to be heating the streets, and we're not going to be putting people in a position where they can't afford to live within their buildings.